Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. Well, one of the really fun things about this part-time, nighttime gig I've got as a radio host is I get to connect up with people that I have a lot of respect for and a lot of time for. And the Honorable Scott Brison is one of those individuals. He's someone that I've had the opportunity to interact with a couple of different times when he was running for politics, when he was in politics, when he was a lowly backbench MP, and he helped me out on one deal that I was working on. And then when he was a cabinet minister, and he helped me out on another deal that I was working on. And so I got to tell you, he's one of the most impressive gentlemen in politics that I've met. And he wrote a really interesting he was in a really interesting podcast on his experiences in elected life. And I wanted to reach out to him and ask what that podcast was all about, what his experiences were all about, and what his recommendations are to people that are thinking about political life. Let me tell you before I go to Mr. Brison a little bit about him. As a member of Parliament, Mr. Brison served King's Haunts in Nova Scotia at Canada's House of Commons 7 consecutive times for 21 years. During that time, he held key roles in government. Most recently, he was president of the Treasury Board and Minister of Digital Government, Minister of Public Works and Government Services, and Parliamentary Secretary to the Prime Minister, with special emphasis on Canada-U.S. relations. He's Dalhousie University's 8th Chancellor. He serves on the boards of Universal Rail Systems, Canada-China Business Council, Dalhousie University, Macdonald Stewart Foundation, CJPAC, Advisory Board of the Canadian American Business Council, Highliner Foods, and Power Sustainable Corporation. Woo! Impressive. Scott Brison, Honorable Scott Brison, how are you, sir?
I'm super, Brian, and it's really great to see you virtually today. I've always had a great deal of respect for you as a person, but also you've got one of those 200-pound brains that actually not only understands business and the market-based economy, but you've got a curiosity about and an interest in and an understanding of public policy. And that's something that I find is rarer than it ought to be. And when you're in government, you come to the conclusion that there aren't a whole lot of people in government who have, whether the experience or understanding of the market-based economy and of business. And in business, rather, I would say that there aren't a whole lot of people who understand government. And I think this is an important challenge for our country that we should take seriously, in that, as you mentioned, I'm Chancellor of Dalhousie University and an alum of the Dalhousie University Business School, and which gives me a line of sight into universities and their model. I really believe that business schools and schools of government should be working together to enable young people to have a foundational education in both business and government. And that would be one of the ways that we could help pave the way to a better future where talented, bright, ambitious people could actually see in their life and career path time in government and time in business. The incentives for someone to be in business, depending on how you look at it, are a hell of a lot greater than they are to be in politics. That being the case, I wouldn't trade my 22 years in public life, in 7 elections and serving 2 prime ministers in their cabinets, or just, my work as a member of parliament for anything. It wasn't what I had planned at the time in terms of the timing of these things, but I do think we need to work hard at attracting really good people to public life, and the business community has to step up and take this seriously as well.
I agree with you, and I think that, and I didn't mention that you're currently vice chairman of BMO Wealth, and so you've certainly been one of those individuals that have served well in government and politics, and now serving in business. I have to tell you, I think that I was a strange individual. As you may know, I went to Harvard Business School. And at the same time, I took a couple of courses and did a mini thesis at the Kennedy School of Government across the river in Cambridge and Boston, and it was very unusual for people to do that. And I had two thesis advisors. One was a former premier, NDP premier of British Columbia, that was serving at the time as a visiting professor at the Kennedy School of Government. And the other one was a very right-wing Republican capital markets finance professor at the business school. So it was a lot of fun to do that mixture. And I agree with you. I think that what we need is more people who've got experience. But, in the United States, it would be typical for people to go from K Street to and lobbyists or think tanks, and then into government, and then back into business and stuff like that. You're unique in that you've been able to do this transition. Why don't more people that have been in government with political experience make that transition from government into business?
Well, look, you mentioned the U.S. Their system is different, and presidents can pick cabinets from people with expertise in a particular area. As a Treasury Secretary or Secretary of Commerce, you can actually pick business people. You can pick you can identify and recruit people to take on these roles, and I think that has some advantages. However, there are some disadvantages to it as well. Our system is a parliamentary system, requiring, of course, that people get elected if they intend on serving in a cabinet, makes it more of a challenge, but it's surmountable. And part of the thing is, and I'm speaking to the Dow convocation coming up to their management grads at the business school. And one of the things that I find is an awful lot of people in their university days have in their mind's eye, the back of their mind, they're thinking about politics someday. And I have some wonderful partners at BMO Capital Markets, for instance, people who in their university days were interested in and active in politics, always intended on running. But they, for a number of reasons, they get on the corporate track, and there are elements of that at some point seem mutually exclusive with a political life. And one thing leads to another. Somebody graduates from university, they get into investment banking. Pretty soon they meet somebody with whom they settle down. They have a family. They live in a neighborhood where the other investment bankers are living, and their kids are going to the school that then they hit around 40, and their career is in full swing, and so is their burn rate, and the ability to pivot to a very different model of remuneration and the rest of it is limited by family commitments and that sort of thing, and the ability to get a spouse to support and a family to buy into as a partner in this. And they end up not doing it. And there are some excellent people who have always had public service instincts who find it very hard to pivot in terms of mid-career. We have some fine CEOs in Canada too, and I would say our CEO community is one of the most progressive and public-minded CEO communities anywhere in the world. And I'm thinking of people like Don Lindsay, who retired a few months ago from tech, people like Nancy Southern, Atco in Calgary, Michael McCain with Maple Leaf Foods, Linda Hasenfratz, Linamar, and I go on in Atlantic Canada. There's some great business leaders as well who would be great in public life. The challenge, what I tell people is, if you have this in the back of your mind, the idea of potentially doing this, manage your life accordingly. And from a fairly young age, as you're making quite a bit of money in business or what have you, live in such a way that you are not spending what you're making, and that you can actually be in a position financially where you and your family are able to do this and to switch gears into a different and fulfilling career in public life for a period. It also means the conducting yourself in such a way that you are building your toolbox ultimately to make you an effective person in public life. So community engagement is critical, and being part of your broader community as a volunteer, as a fundraiser and supporter of organizations for all the right reasons, not because you're thinking of entering politics one day. It's just about being a good citizen and a good member of your community. And to be honest, most business people I know, and most business leaders, particularly the leaders, are really good citizens. They care about the country as much as they care about all the stakeholders, from shareholders to communities they serve, to employees and clients and customers. So they're doing a lot of the things right. But if you're planning on public life, or even as an option, being deliberate about how you conduct your life before, I think is really important. Now,
it's all very good advice. There's no question about that. It's great advice. Yeah. However, I'm not sure if it's ironic or not, but right now we have leaders of all three major parties that are the opposite of really what you've described. People that have almost been, if not completely career politicians, almost career politicians. And so it appears, I guess, that just going into politics right away, or after a little bit of teaching or something like that, is sort of the way that our current leaders are doing it. Anyway, we got to take a break for some messages, and we'll be back with the Honorable Scott Brison in just 2 minutes. Stay with us, everybody. Welcome back, everyone, to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. It's a real honor of mine to check back in with a gentleman that I have a lot of respect for, the Honorable Scott Brison, who has been involved in politics for 21 years and is now the deputy vice chair, the vice chair of Bank of Montreal, BMO Wealth. We were just chatting now, Scott, about how you thought some people, in business should consider going into politics. But we do have, it would appear, leaders of all the current three major parties that have almost been career politicians, and if not completely career politicians, in the case of Pierre Poilievre, Justin Trudeau taught for a while before he became a politician, and the leader of the NDP, I guess, was a lawyer for a while and then became a politician in Ontario before he became a politician federally. So does that suggest that what you're suggesting sort of doesn't work, or no one does it, or what do you think? And actually, maybe ask you another question at the same time, if I could. There was a really interesting article in the Globe and Mail, a major criticism of the Liberal Party back a couple of months ago, that said the Liberal Party in the past has always had a business person in cabinet, a fair amount of business-oriented people in cabinet, and doesn't today. And they suggested that that was a real weakness. And so I guess it's another extension of the problem that you just identified, of business people not going into politics. And they suggested, Martin with the Chrétien years, and Turner with the Trudeau, the senior Trudeau years, et cetera, and that there was a lack of that in Parliament today, and certainly in the cabinet. And there were too many lawyers and career politicians. So what do you think about the career politician route versus the route that you've suggested?
Well, I think a mix is actually a good thing. I'm a big fan of Winston Churchill's, and he was a member of Parliament for 60 years, and nobody can doubt his commitment to and impact to public life, and there. So I think a mix is actually can be a very good thing, including of people younger and people more experienced. I had a very active business career in New York and also in Canada in my 20s. And I never intended on running until I was in my 50s. But that changed when I was asked to run, and Jean Charest, I was elected twice as a progressive conservative and 5 times as a liberal. But Jean Charest was a leader who really inspired me, and I ended up running. I turned 30 in my first election. That's not when people ask me, when people who are building careers ask me, or people in university, when they should run, and they talk to me and say, they're surprised often when I tell them I don't think you should run early. I think you should build your career first. I do think there is an issue. When I entered public life, I actually did have a fairly clear idea as to how I viewed business and government and the market-based economy, and the importance of it in public policy to create growth and prosperity, including fiscal responsibility. And my business experience, I drew on it quite a bit when I was in public life, and when I was in opposition, I actually was quite active in business. I helped start a private equity firm that has subsequently been very successful. I was chairman of it, a company called Seafort Capital. I was on a few boards and things. So I was active in both business and politics when I wasn't in a cabinet, when my party wasn't in office, which is something I recommend to people as well. The problem is with if you don't have experience to draw on, you rely on ideology, and ideologies were far too simplistic to solve the problems of the 20th century. The problems today are infinitely more complex, and the potential for ideologically rigid solutions are actually, to be successful, is actually less. So if you're kind of on the left side of things, you rely on left-wing ideology, or on the right, you rely on sort of the right wing. So you're talking about privatizing sidewalks, and then the left-wing ideologues are always crapping on business, ignoring the fact that we have a market-based economy and that's a very good thing. And I go back to that point that we need people in elected office who actually have experience and understanding of market-based economies. And the Liberal Party has had and continues to, within the Liberal caucus, there's actually quite a few people who have some significant business experience within the cabinet. I mean, we have people like François-Philippe Champagne, Jonathan Wilkinson, business background, Anita Anand as an example. There are people who do have strong business backgrounds, and they, in my opinion, the Liberal Party would do well to put those people out front more, and to remember the fiscal responsibility part of the Liberal DNA, which has been a very important one over time. Now, when I talk about the lack of interest in fiscal responsibility today, that is not something unique to one government or another. Governments of all stripes, federal, provincial, in Canada, outside of Canada, we're back to the 70s in terms of how political parties and governments are looking at fiscal responsibility. And like the 70s, you've got governments at all levels spending a lot of money, while central banks are trying to tighten somewhat to manage inflationary costs. And ironically, the governments that are spending money are telling people it's to help fight inflation or help people deal with higher inflation. And spending money to help fight inflation is a little bit like what Woody Allen said, that fighting for peace is like making love for virginity. It's not exactly logical on this, but I do think there are some good people in the current cabinet. I also think, I mean, people like Chrystia Freeland, as an example, has a lot of experience as a business journalist and has an understanding of business and markets through that lens. Her deputy minister, Michael Sabia, I think all Canadians owe a debt of gratitude to Michael for having, at this stage of his life, chosen again public service, and taking someone who has been head of the CDPQ in the past, head of BCE, CFO, I believe, at one point of CN. I mean, he's had a brilliant private sector career, including and some past experience in government. The challenge in some ways,
that's very unusual. The only other person I can think of like that would be David Dodge, but there's not many people that come from outside government and become a very senior deputy minister, is there?
It's not as common as it ought to be. And the system, any new entrant to government or bureaucracy faces a system that is not necessarily geared towards welcoming them and encouraging their success. The white blood cells surround them as if they were a splinter and try to force them out, or at least make it very difficult for them to achieve progress. And we need people to disrupt a government. We need people to disrupt universities. We need people to disrupt big, complex organizations, and they need to be people, I believe, from outside. But I also think that in public life and elected life, some of the best people are people from a small business background. Don Mazankowski was a very successful cabinet minister in the Mulroney government. He owned a car dealership in Vegreville, Alberta. And if you're a small business person in a community, your business is based on trust, on doing that which you commit to for your clients, your customers, and members of the community. You have to understand business and be able to run your business efficiently, meet a payroll, pay the bank back, deal with the financial obligations of the business, growth. The reality of the economy is something you're dealing with on an ongoing basis. I actually think that in ridings across Canada, identifying really respected business people, in a lot of cases, small business people, can be the person who owns the Canadian Tire franchise in a community, or a person who's run a successful real estate development company in an area. These are people who are really a big part of their community. They're people with a lot of common sense, and they understand that business is not the enemy of the public good. In fact, it's absolutely essential to engage with business to build public good and get good value for tax dollars and taxpayers while you're delivering good services to citizens.
I'm not sure there's that many people in Ottawa that actually agree with that statement. At least I'm worried there aren't.
Well, maybe we should change that.
I think you're right.
And I don't think. Look, I think I talk to CEOs and business people and investors all the time, and I've never seen or felt a greater level of disenchantment with politics than today. And I hear people who are really, have always been really engaged as citizens, interested in public policy, kind of shrugging today and just saying, I kind of give up. And we can't give up because the country is just too important, and the future of our country, the future of our children's lives, and ultimately someday our grandchildren. My daughters are 9 years old. I've got twins, and I'm a long ways from grandchildren. But I think about my daughters' futures. I mean, they are dual citizens, Canada and US. They're 9 now. In about a decade, they will be going to post-secondary education. Maybe it'll be in the US, maybe it'll be in Canada, maybe it'll be somewhere else. I'll encourage them to go to Dalhousie, but the world is their oyster. But when they really choose where they want to build their future and raise their families, I want them to choose Canada. And I'm worried about the trajectory we're on as a country, in that if our GDP on a secular basis grows more slowly than the US GDP,
which it has for what, a decade, if not more?
Yeah, and you're right, on a secular basis. So if that trend line continues, say over 20 years or so, and it can be just half a point or even a point or whatever it is per year.
But our GDP has grown at significantly lower than the United States. Our productivity has been lower than the United States. Our gross income per capita has been less than the United States. We've actually suffered that for probably your 20 years.
Well, and here's the problem with that, is that the compound impact, people don't notice that over a year, but the compounding of that over time the result is very simple. Our children will be poorer than their American counterparts in 20 years or 30 years. Now, that may be fine with some people, but I think if you really think about it, for us to accept that, and shrug our shoulders, we are complicit in a decision that will see our children be poorer compared to the Americans in 20 years or 30 years. We are complicit in a collective sort of decision that will see our best and brightest potentially going to other places. Now, the US has all kinds of problems. And let me be very clear. I want to be in Canada, and I want my kids to be in Canada. But I also want them to choose Canada on the basis that we are an economically ambitious place, that we understand the importance of growth and opportunity. An awful lot of our GDP growth right now is being driven through immigration. And I am a huge fan of immigration. I think it's one growth policy that the current government has embraced with gusto, and I think that is a good thing.
But that grows absolute GDP. It doesn't grow per capita GDP. It doesn't grow per capita incomes.
Totally. That is exactly the problem. The other thing is we have to build housing. And I find it shocking that we describe excessive demand for a sector, an economic sector in our country that employs people in every riding of the country, housing. We refer to it as a crisis. This is a massive opportunity, and frankly, if we don't get our act together on housing and letting the private sector build the housing and fill the demand that is growing in Canada, there's a real risk. In fact, I think it's quite certain that we will jeopardize or are jeopardizing the social license we have for immigration. In the old days, when jobs were scarce, people would ask politicians, why are we bringing in people from other countries when they take jobs from our kids? At some point, people are going to start asking, why would we bring in people from other countries if they take housing or from our kids, or put the prices up? I don't want that to happen, because I think immigration is and the dynamism and the ambition of our new Canadian and first generation community, the entrepreneurialism, is hugely accretive to our country economically and socially.
I agree with you completely, but we do have, all those statistics that we compared Canada versus the United States. We have debt per capita, personal household debt per capita, that is twice what it is than in the United States. So, we don't have the growth in income. We don't have the growth in GDP per capita, but we do leverage ourselves up to a degree that is twice what the United States is. And for your housing problem right now, we are building 40% of the homes per capita that we were building 2 decades ago.
Municipal governments, any municipal government that is pointing to Ottawa and saying they want more money for housing should really look in the mirror, because if I were...
Government's the problem.
The federal government, in my view, provides a lot of money directly to municipalities, as do the provincial governments. Until they start tying that to changes in municipal policy and procedure around densification, and until municipal leaders embrace YIMBYism and reject NIMBYism, I wouldn't send them a plug nickel. And you go down, the other day I walked 3 kilometers to a breakfast meeting along Yonge Street. My breakfast meeting was in Rosedale, and I was in the office early, and I walked up and walked and listened to a podcast on the way to the breakfast meeting. And you go along Yonge Street, and a thoroughfare fully served by modes of public transit and everything else. And you see mile after mile of 2-story buildings on either side of the street. And these are not, architectural treasures or heritage properties. They're pretty rundown buildings that in a lot of cases, I know there's a mayoralty race in Toronto right now. I'd love to see somebody get elected with a growth plan that says, look, we're going to identify these growth areas, and any application will be processed through a shot clock type of approach, where after 60 days it's deemed approved unless the government has replied or responded as a no based on certain criteria, and put the onus on government and speed up approvals.
We desperately need it. I'll send you my April Fool's joke. That was my my mayoralty announcement of my campaign, and I had a section exactly on that topic. We're going to take a break for some messages and be back with the Honorable Scott Brison in just 2 minutes. Stay with us, everybody. Welcome back, everyone, to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. My guest tonight is the Honorable Scott Brison. He spent 21 years. He was elected 7 times to Parliament, and now he is the Vice Chair of BMO Wealth. And he was both a progressive conservative and a liberal, which is very unusual and unique. Scott, you said that most of the CEOs, or a lot of CEOs that you speak with, are disillusioned today by politics a few minutes ago. And I want to probe you on that if I could. You know, I've talked to a lot of people that feel that there's not a place for them in Canadian politics anymore, because they're either a blue liberal or a red Tory. And, you know, a lot of people think that the problem with politics in Canada today is that the Liberal Party has moved to the left, and the Conservative Party has moved to the right. And the vast majority of Canadians are in the middle, and there's nowhere left to go. And whether it is sort of fiscal conservatism within the Liberal Party or progressive conservatives within the Conservative Party, that they don't have a place to go anymore. What do you think? Is that potentially one of the problems?
Yes, I agree with everything you just said. I believe both parties would better serve Canadians if they were to embrace a more centrist approach. The Liberal Party would embrace market-based economic approaches to solving some of the big public challenges facing the country, including housing, and that and cease the sort of knee-jerk anti-business rhetoric, and stop demonizing business and success. And I think the Conservatives ought to, again, on social issues and others, stop the extreme approaches that are helping them shore up a base, and instead focus on that centrist voter. And I actually think it could be a winning formula. Now the challenge is, in the old days, the way a progressive Conservative Party would get elected, or a Liberal Party would get elected, it required a unifying sort of approach to bring together Brian Mulroney and Joe Clark and Robert Stanfield. All those progressive Conservative leaders had people within their party who were reform type people, who had certain views on the way the world and the country ought to be run, that were quite similar to sort of a reform party kind of perspective. And liberals, and they also had, rather, the PCs, sort of more centrist, or even in some cases fairly maybe even center-left people as part of a big tent. And you had to be a big tent to get elected, because you had to present a coherent and platform to Canadians that helped build consensus. You sort of sanded off the rough parts and focused on presenting something that was a centrist vision. Liberals the same way. We had very much pro-business, sort of capitalist type liberals, and then you would have left of center, sort of more socialistic liberals, a whole range from different parts of the country. And they figured things out because they knew they had to provide that unified vision. Data,
that doesn't happen. That's not needed anymore.
Well, I think the politics. I think data and the maniacal focus on data has changed things. Today, we have the capacity, political parties have the capacity through data to identify voters within very narrow bands. You can get the anti-vaxxers, the crypto folks, the WEF conspiracy folks, and you can get enough of them together and get enough people who hate somebody or something, and you can build an electoral coalition that can actually win you quite a few seats or form a government. On the other hand, you can build the anti-business folks or the anti-natural resource sector folks, what have you. You can build a whole coalition of people on the left as well, and I think parties are doing that. They are identifying voters based on narrow bands, and that can be a winning formula for one election or another. I just think it's a shitty way to build the country, and I think that the best way to change that is to have a critical mass of people in both parties win nominations, run and win elections, who are people of experience, character, judgment, and decency. The experience is critical. I mean, Brian, when you and I first met, I was in my 30s, and I ran for the leadership of two national parties in my 30s. Now, thank God I didn't win, because I realize now that I'm in my 50s that I'm a hell of a lot better today in just about every way than I was then. Now, I thought I knew everything in my 30s, and there's a difference between being smart and clever and that kind of thing and actually having experience, because successes inform your judgment and experience. Failures are far more important, and until you've had some failures, you're not ready for prime time anyway. And getting the kinds of people who have been pulled through the knothole of life at various points in business and other ventures and into public life, and it doesn't have to be just business. I'm just talking about people of achievement and character. I'm a liberal who was hoping Jean Charest would win the Progressive Conservative, or the not. Oh, gee whiz,
That's a Freudian slip.
No, it's not actually Freudian, because there's nothing. I don't really think of them as a Progressive Conservative party. And look, I'm not slagging any party over another. I'm just describing a frustration that the issues today are very complex, and I supported Charest because he's a leader who's had his ups and downs. He understands business. He understands government. He's a person of character and decency, but
he was criticized by his opponent as not even being conservative.
Yeah, well, that's so. Look, the folks, the ideological sort of litmus test that a lot of people in the Conservative Party or Liberal Party apply to people is bunk. A person, I've spent quite a bit of my life being a progressive conservative, and people accusing me of being a liberal, and then being a liberal and people accusing me of being a conservative. And to be honest, I really don't care. I believe in and have values and a perspective that is informed not by pollsters and strategists. It's informed by my experience and my judgment, and my curiosity, and my common sense. Now, you can, and I fit into a fairly centrist perspective, or rather a fairly centrist positioning. But we do need within now Charest, when he finished being Premier of Quebec, he left a $13 billion surplus as a provincial premier. And what operated a very pro-business government. There's a lot of people in the Conservative Party who act as if the Conservative Party didn't exist before 2003 when the merger occurred. But I remember in elections like 1988, when I was a young progressive conservative, campaigning at that time for Mulroney and candidates for Mulroney in a free trade election. And in that election, the PC party lost quite a few seats in Western Canada due to vote splitting with the Reform Party. And so there was a pivotal election on an economic issue, free trade, that Preston Manning and Stephen Harper and other people were splitting the vote and potentially jeopardizing the election. So those the people who want to question the bona fides of Jean Charest as a conservative ought to realize that history didn't start in 2003.
Well, for them it did, because they think the Conservative Party is that party that the Reform Party, the Alliance, took over in 2003. And the Progressive Conservative Party that you're talking about, with all due respect, I don't think exists today. And I think that's part of the problem. Anyway, we're going to take a final break and be back with Scott Brison, the Honorable Scott Brison, and some concluding comments in just 2 minutes. Stay with us, everybody. Welcome back, everyone, to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 860. The Honorable Scott Brison, 21 years in Parliament, 7 successful elections, a really smart guy, a really nice guy. I'm honored to have him on the show tonight. Scott, a former Minister of Finance, wrote a book and said that we don't have a growth agenda. We don't have a prosperity agenda in Canada today. Is that the problem?
Well, I do believe that we need to have economic ambition. There is no country in the world with our combination of advantages, natural resource advantages, human resource advantages, diversity, openness to immigration, every kind of energy from uranium to hydrogen to natural gas and traditional hydrocarbons to all the alternative. We have it all. We're like the guy born on third base, hits a bunt and thinks he hit a home run. And we're frittering it away. And we need to have economic ambition again as a country and get serious about ensuring that our children and their children choose Canada, and that the case for them to choose Canada is a compelling one, not just based on nostalgia and love of our country, but also on economic opportunity. We should not be asking of our children that they choose a less prosperous future to be in the country they love. We have every opportunity. We should be, and I look at a Macron in France with his En Marche movement. He's facing real challenges, but I like the cut of his jib. And he is basically saying this is what we need to do. And you can vote for him or not vote for him, but he has a clear path to try to make France a more competitive and economically successful, sustainably prosperous country. I'd like to see that kind of approach in Canada, and I'd like to see a political party or movement and leader say to Canadians, by the end of this decade, our program, this is what we're going to do, and I believe we can, as Canadians, have the highest standard of living in the world by the end of this decade. And you can say sustainable standard of living, that's table stakes environmentally and socially. But the fact is we should aspire to that. Money can't buy happiness, but neither can poverty. And mediocrity doesn't get you anywhere. And I really believe that there is an opportunity for us to turn this around, but it's going to take people like you and other people who have been successful in business to enter the fray and engage politically in very serious ways. 30 years ago, it was commonplace for business leaders to have some level of political affiliation. Somehow, over the last 30 years, GR people in big companies have convinced the bosses, you just stay away from politics. There's a cost to that, to business leaders staying away from public life and staying away from politics. I think that people need to stop complaining and roll up their sleeves and be willing to jump in and help. And some of them may put their names on ballots. Others can help people within their companies enter public life. But we need really good people who understand business, who understand growth, who understand communities and public service to enter the fray and to make a difference. And I can tell you, based on my experience, notwithstanding its challenges, there is no place you can make more of a difference than in elected public life. I left public life when my daughters were 4 years old. They're 9 now, and I won't be going back until they're out of high school, which is in about a decade. But I don't want the country to slide in the interim under any, I don't care what party it is. I want to see an ambitious agenda to create a more prosperous future for my children and your children. And prosperity enables all kinds of socially progressive investments and nation building, but you got to have the prosperity. Redistribution is one thing, but pre-distribution, where you're giving it away before you're creating the wealth, is something with which I have a bit of a quarrel. And we better actually figure out how to build wealth in this country again, to celebrate success, to celebrate wealth creators, to celebrate business builders, and not denigrate them. And that's a mindset shift. And I don't hear much about economic growth or fiscal responsibility from any party these days. And whether conservative, liberal, or NDP. This is not a partisan issue. We have had provincial NDP governments that were actually quite fiscally responsible. We've had liberal and conservative governments, some of whom have been fiscally responsible and growth-oriented, some of them haven't. This is not a partisan issue. This is an issue of citizenship and urgency and opportunity and ambition. So Ambition Canada is what we need. And that's what I hope to see a growing number of people actually take action around.
Honorable Scott Brison for Prime Minister, thank you so much for showing up tonight. Really appreciate it. Great words.
I'd have one of Canada's earlier same-sex divorces if I did it while my kids were at this age. But
that's our show for tonight, everybody. Thanks for joining us, Mr. Brison. Really appreciate it. Good night, everybody.